Hi everyone, welcome to class. This is Mr. Daryl
and I'm Mr. Alex.
Today we are going to talk about another classic horror, the man behind nightmares and legends, Dracula.
And you know, Daryl, I really can't get enough of this genre. As we remember, last week we were discussing Frankenstein, and now we're talking about Dracula, and there's a very clear connection between these two. But I think something we should start off with is perhaps the author, and we should discuss the author, Bram Stoker. Now, Bram Stoker was born on November the 8th in 1847 in Ireland, and he studied at Trinity College, Dublin, Dublin being the capital city of Ireland. There, he studied history, maths, physics and literature.
So a bit of a genius.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got quite a vast amount of knowledge. But let's go to the beginning, and let's begin with his childhood and the mysterious illness that he had up until the age of 7. Now, this illness made him completely bedridden. He was incredibly weak. He'd get sleep paralysis. He'd have these unexplained nightmares, and generally he was a very unhealthy child up until the age of 7.
Imagine that as a childhood influence. That how would it shape your imagination? Think about that. How it would shape your imagination, how it would shape your outlook.
Absolutely, and I think we can see the influence perhaps already of his childhood trauma already starting to translate into the book. If we can remember when Mina and Lucy get possessed by Dracula, when they become weak, when they start seeing these nightmares, again, he is writing from experience, much like Mary Shelley. Now, the interesting thing about his illness up until the age of 7, it really contributed to his depiction of the landscape. Now, what do I mean by this? If we remember last time, we were speaking about the difference between Romantic literature and Gothic literature, and the key element of Romantic literature is the depiction of the landscape as a paradise, somewhere to escape to, somewhere where you can feel comfortable. Gothic literature, on the other hand, it makes the landscape far more, let's just say you feel trapped within the landscape. It's a far more gloomy landscape. And let me explain this in more detail in terms of his childhood. So while he was ill, his parents would sometimes take him out into the Irish landscape. Countryside, excuse me, to get some fresh air, so on and so forth. And while most Irish authors, such as C.S. Lewis, described the landscape as beautiful, for him it was something that was vast, infinite, unexplainable, mysterious, and something that generally instilled lots of fear into him. And he has said himself that perhaps this is the inspiration behind his description of the Transylvanian landscape. Vast, mysterious, dark and gloomy.
If we look at the book, in fact, we can see the place that Count Dracula originates from is the Eastern Europe sort of mysterious, murky feel, and that has that Irish landscape in it. And then when the setting switches to London, it's a lot more claustrophobic and a lot more modern. So we have those two contrasts sharply presented to us. Absolutely.
And this contrast, I suppose, creates an intensity to the environment, and it's quite a dynamic environment as well. And now we've already spoken about the genre and how this is Gothic genre, something that makes you feel trapped. But this is intensified even more so by the style, and the style of this novel is epistolic. And perhaps you could explain what epistolic writing is.
Yes, it's using many different methods and many different viewpoints and many different points of view to tell the story. So, and Dracula, in fact, the book uses diary entries, letters, newspaper articles, and various other means. And this is actually turns out to be a very popular 19th century literary device. A lot of authors use it, and so in this sense, it is part of its time.
And I suppose what makes it so effective is you've got literal objects from the story. A newspaper is an object, a letter is an object, and it feels almost more tactile, like you can touch it, and it makes the story really come to life, I suppose.
Excellent point, Alex.
I think we ought to talk about the inspiration behind Count Dracula, because there are many, many. And let's bear in mind, this is the Victorian period, and we have Jack the Ripper, and this mysterious character who was going around murdering vulnerable women. And Jack the Ripper is in the legend has it, is said to be a very attractive man who lured women also to their deaths. And we can already see the similarity there between Count Dracula and Jack the Ripper. Other influences, and a really significant influence when it comes to the physicality of Dracula and what he looks like, is Henry Irving, the actor Henry Irving, who Bram Stoker would go on to manage. He was his manager. And then you also have Vlad the Impaler, who's a very interesting character from history.
Yes, he is an actual prince, a Romanian prince, and there's all sorts of legends that have developed around him, where he was notoriously brutal, notoriously cruel, and quite violent. And so there's a lot of legends of murder and of evil, basically.
And impaling, it's such a awful form of execution, and it's almost like when you impale someone, it kind of represents the fangs of a Dracula, these horrible spikes that we have in a
turned upside down. So you have usually the impalers are pointing upwards, whereas Dracula's fangs are pointing downwards. So there's that neat kind of reversal of the image.
And now remember, last time when we were speaking about Frankenstein, we said that there's this very significant connection between Frankenstein and Dracula.
Yeah.
And also remember, last time we were speaking about how Mary Shelley came to write Frankenstein. She wrote it as a result of a horror story writing competition, as she was challenged by Byron.
Yes.
But it wasn't just Mary, Byron and Percy Shelley who were present. There was also Byron's doctor, John William Polidori, and he actually also participated in this horror writing competition, and he came up with a story. And perhaps you could tell us about the story he came up with.
He came up with a story, and it was actually called, apropos of today, Vampire. And it set the first association of a vampire with aristocracy. So the vampire in Mr. Polidori's story was an aristocratic man, an alluring man in that sense. He's got power, he's got affluence, and it turns out that he also has this evil side to him, which, as we know from reading the book, Dracula, there are a lot of parallels and a lot of borrowing from that image.
Count Dracula himself, a very rich nobleman who, and he's also described as an attractive nobleman who himself, he attracts vulnerable women, the likes of Lucy, for example.
There is a bit of a difference, and this is the originality, I suppose, of Dracula and Bram Stoker's version. Dracula, when he comes to London, becomes this highly energetic businessman. He's arranging for things to be moved. He's buying real estate. He has lawyers in his employ. He's got real estate agents, and he's got all sorts of things going on. He's a representative of an energetic sort of Londoner, middle class or upper, who's doing things, and that is, I thought it was an interesting aspect of the presentation of Vlad. He's not just this evil sort of mysterious figure. He's an energetic and active person in London doing business and accomplishing a lot of things.
Yes, there is certainly originality going on in this novel, and which I think moves us onto the themes that Bram Stoker here is exploring. One of them being good overcoming evil. Now, a vampire, you can't help but look at a vampire as being a sort of demonic figure, someone who preys on the weak, stays youthful by drinking the blood of children. This is a really awful character. Now, John Harker, the protagonist in this story, he's got this constant battle with Dracula, and you're always wondering if he's going to be able to overcome Dracula's power. But by the end of the story, indeed, he does defeat Dracula, and things turn out rather well. Mm-hmm. But you also have the theme of romantic relationships and individuality going on.
Yes, but we will have to think of the setting now. The setting is the Victorian setting, and it is a repressive setting, and society is well organized and well choreographed in a sense. And Mina, we have two female characters, Mina and
Lucy.
Yes, Lucy. And Lucy is the more rebellious one. She breaks the mold of the Victorian society more to a greater degree than Mina does. Mina, who stays faithful to her fiancé, who then becomes her husband, Harker. Lucy, having broken the bonds of Victorian society, dies and pays the ultimate price for it. Whereas Mina, who sticks within the accepted norms of Victorian society, survives. And I wonder if that's a comment by Mr. Stoker on that.
That actually has divided literary opinion on specifically what this is about. But I think we can say that Mina's soul is almost too pure for Dracula to tempt, and she overcomes Dracula. And that suggests to me there's something stronger about her character compared to Mina's.
Yes, so that might be a more existential point. She herself has more resources within her to fight off the Dracula, the evil influence.
Now, Dracula, of course, and the vampire story in general, is a huge pop culture phenomenon, and it's loved by many. And what I find particularly interesting is that while Dracula is this evil character and the historical vampire is an evil character, the modern vampire is almost seen as a hero. And you've got films the likes of Twilight, where Robert Pattinson's character is almost seen as the hero. He's the good guy. He's the guy we're vouching for.
Yes, and there's a vampire movie by Jim Jarmusch, the sort of auteur director, and he portrays the vampires as rock stars.
Oh, really?
And so they, up to this point, vampires are the outsiders. They're outside of society. They're evil. They're clearly evil. But now we have them as rock stars. We have them as good guys. They've clearly infiltrated our imaginations to the point where they're no longer perceived as just evil or just something to be fought off. I wonder if that says something about our changing societal views on ourselves.
Maybe, but on a more simple point, that it's almost like they're like superheroes. They've got powers.
Yes,
they can do things that
yes.
most human beings can't.
Yes.
We will see you next Friday. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.